Hey witches, it's Lee and this is Do Magical Thing. I thought I'd have a little chat with you about myths and things that I sort of wish I'd learn, and a kind of advice really for witches, old and new, doesn't really matter, but it might be especially helpful for the newbies out there. And I think the first thing I'd say is that we've got to remember witchcraft is a practice, not a religion. It's something that we do rather than something we believe. And so my first myth to bust, if you like, my first bit of advice, is that you don't have to believe in deities to be a witch. You know, I'm a non-theist witch, and that means that I don't include deities in my practice, but I do incorporate elements of the supernatural. And there are atheist witches out there, and there are materialist atheist witches out there who think of witchcraft perhaps more as a placebo effect, in a good way, who think of it more as a psychological tool. And that's fine. It's a space under the umbrella of witchcraft for everything. And I think under the umbrella of witchcraft we have Wicca, and we have traditional witchcraft, and we have practices that are religions and are theist beliefs, or polytheist beliefs, you know, for that matter, and they're all valid too, but sometimes they can, I think there's a lot of crossover of those beliefs, and it can drown out some of those sort of non-theist and atheist voices. And so I would advise, you know, just remind yourself that it doesn't matter who you are, you can be a witch. It doesn't matter what you believe. And if you've, you know, moving away from kind of a religion or a theism and a bit disappointed in this discovery of every book bang on about gods and goddesses, there are books out there that aren't focused on that. You can find them. There are atheist witchcraft communities and non-theist practices out there, and there are more materialist pagans out there too. So there's all of that room under the umbrella of witchcraft. So don't feel alone. You absolutely can practice magic, and there's so much, just by removing the deities out of witchcraft and of the occult, there's so much of that still to play with, still to kind of have, you know, a bit of an exploration around. So yeah, so get stuck in with what you can, and yeah, don't feel like you can't be a witch, because you absolutely can be. And I'd say from there, my next sort of thing and myth to bust and bit of advice would be that you don't have to be in a coven to practice effective magic. I think a lot of the time people think that they have to get in with a group of witches, or that automatically, you know, every witch is going to be your friend. And the fact is that witches are human, and not everybody is going to get on with everyone else. And not only that, but a lot of witches are solitary, and especially at the moment with, you know, the fact of gatherings being not particularly possible. You know, online spaces are fantastic for getting into the witchcraft community. You know, and online groups are certainly valid, and online covens are a thing. You know, people can do those sort of things. And, you know, I'm in a online group that has kind of become a coven over the years, because we've all just got to know each other, and we've all built bonds, and we do monthly spells or thereabouts, and it can be fantastically powerful magic, and it can be beautiful to see everyone, despite the distance to one another, doing these things. But I think that's really a case of practicing alone, together, and that's a phrase that I really love, because it surmises what a lot of witchcraft is. It's about individuals working for the benefit of themselves and for everybody else, and obviously, you know, there's fantastic and thoughtful and powerful moments to be had in a group, and you know, there are. The great thing about being online is that there are local moots or local meetups that you can then go to in real life and explore that, and that's absolutely valid. But as I say, you're no less of a witch if you just practice alone, because I'm a solitary witch and I've been, you know, practicing successful magic for years now, so it's all absolutely fine to be, you know, practicing alone. And I think it's worth having that time to really explore what you think, because otherwise you can get sort of told what to think in a way, and kind of just end up going along with it because you're new, or because you want to find that approval. And I just, with any kind of meet up as well, when we get to that point we can all meet up with each other again, I would just say that it's worth making sure that we're considering, you know, that it's in a public place, and that it's somewhere that, you know, has easy transport links and things like that, because, you know, if you're meeting any new people for the first time, I don't have to tell you that it's worth you know, being somewhere where you can leave if you want to leave. Going on from there, my next sort of thing to say is that nobody is a guru in witchcraft. There are witches who can give you advice, and there are great practitioners out there. But if someone is trying to sell you something, maybe they're trying to flog you like a course online or something like that for, hundreds of pounds or hundreds of dollars or hundreds of whatever it is your currency is, you've got to think, what am I actually going to get out of this? And is this perhaps money well spent, or could I have bought 50 books with the amount of money I've spent on this course to get 5 emails and the big secret that they're trying to, they've told you you're going to get is actually just to meditate a few times a week. Like there's these people out there who will try and rinse you because, capitalism seeks into everything, unfortunately, including witchcraft. And so just be cautious of anyone who's trying to tell you something that they won't tell you without some kind of exchange of money, because whilst there are legitimate practitioners out there and whilst there are witches out there who make their living through, readings of different things, through spell works and stuff like that, that's absolutely tickety-boo. But you've just got to be cautious because a lot of folks will be trying to pick on, especially newer witches who really are keen to learn, who want to learn everything, who feel like they are missing out. And actually, witchcraft just takes a bit of time, it takes a bit of learning, a bit of patience, and you'll soon learn just as much, if not more, than whoever it is who is running this course or whatever it is they're doing. So just be cautious of that, and be cautious of getting into a kind of a fandom as such of particular witches, because I think sometimes we need space to really grow on our own. So my next thing to say to you, really, other than the guru thing, and talking about sort of witches of influence, with witchcraft books, my sort of myth to bust there is that they're not all an authority. They're not all, the gospel truth, so to speak. They're an interpretation of whatever it is they've been practicing and whatever it is they've been using and doing over the years. Because witchcraft books there's so many of them, and again, people sometimes write them for a quick buck, or publishers will use like shadow writers to put out these kind of generic books that actually don't offer a great deal of value to witches. Having said that, there are some fantastic, and I am a huge proponent of reading, because, or listening if you're not a big fan of reading, because there are some fantastic authors out there. Authors are humans, just like the rest of us, and they can only go by the information they have at the time. But yeah, fantastic authors out there, absolutely. But read around the book, not just the book itself. If something's telling you that this is how it's done, this is, and it's not, and it's kind of telling you that other people are wrong, I would just question that a little bit. If it's excluding anybody, I would definitely question that and potentially throw that book away. and yeah, I think just use your critical thinking skills when it comes to any kind of publication. Because just because it's in a book and it's got a cover and you can find it on Amazon or find it wherever, it doesn't mean that it is any more valid than what you or your coven, your online group mates think, or whoever it is you're talking to. It doesn't make it any more valid. People are flawed, and I've read so many books where I've cringed and thought, oh, and I've read some books where I've been amazed and excited and it's blown my mind. So again, critical thinking is key, but yeah, just because they've written a book doesn't mean it's an authority. It doesn't mean you have to agree with what they're saying. The same goes for me. It doesn't have to agree with me. I'm just putting out what I think and my experiences. And there's always other people out there to explore. So do if I'm not your cup of tea. And going on from sort of the books thing, I would say that my next tip for you, my next sort of myth to bust is really to not just accept the interpretation of a source, and that people will kind of claim that they have this particular practice and actually it's rooted in something else, or rooted in a primary text. And when I say primary text, I mean kind of any witchcraft text that has, or magical text, that has influenced current practice. So I'm thinking of Henry Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. You've got Eliphas Levi's, Doctrine and Ritual. There's some people think of Aradia, Gospel of the Witches. I haven't read that fully yet, so I'm not sure if I'd consider it primary text myself, but it certainly influenced people. Now these primary texts again will be flawed, but at least if you can get these primary texts, normally because they're out of print, you'll get like a PDF somewhere, or you can buy a print copy. Generally the print copies are kind of useful because they're translated and there's notes and things like that. But if you can get hold of these primary texts that a lot of books reference, if you can go to the source, then you've really got that nugget of information, and you can take out what you think is valuable and what you don't, and build your craft from there, and then you can see in other practices, you go, oh, I know where they've got that from, that's from this, and I've read that from here, and all that kind of stuff. And so yeah, I think it just really helps to learn the originals, even if you just flick through them, because some of them are kind of dense and written in a very kind of bizarre tone, which is appropriate for the time they were made, but now it can be hard work to get through them. But do try and explore original sources. As I say, PDFs you can often find of them, or I've got a good copy of the 3 books of occult philosophy that I invested in because it is so influential. But yeah, just see how you go with these books. And any book recommendations that I make or that you see on this channel, I would always say it doesn't mean that I agree with everything written on every page. It's something that I think is useful or could benefit you. So just bear that in mind for now and future videos. So we've talked about the source material and going back to the source, and I think it's also worth thinking about practices that perhaps have been spread wider than they were originally intended to be spread. So what I'm talking about here specifically is things like cultural appropriation or cultural misappropriation. And if you haven't come across that term before, it's essentially when a specific practice gets taken out of context and often out of the culture that it was originated from, and then is sometimes used by overculture in a way that's perhaps not the original intent, and for that reason can be quite harmful, especially as these cultures that these practices were taken from were often suppressed by the overculture that is now using it and saying what a good thing it is and yeah, it's a real challenge there. So there are certain practices, certain rituals that you might want to look into the origins of. Is it something that is an open practice? Is it a closed practice? So is it something that wider people can use? Is it something that is actually quite specific and has a specific thing? One instance would be smudging. So smudging is a ritual in certain tribes of Native Americans in America, and smudging is where you would burn specifically white sage, and there's certain things around that, and some people have taken the kind of sage out of that, not necessarily included the rest of it, and said that's the must-have thing for cleansing, and they're missing a lot of nuance there and a lot of cultural specifics. And actually there are practices of smoke cleansing, which is probably the better word to use for it, that are open, and there are things that are specific to different people. And so you've got in Scotland there's seining, and seining is when they use particular plants to smoke cleanse. In England and I believe in Roman times as well, mugwort was something that was used for smoke cleansing. So for every practice that you come across that is, perhaps a closed practice, I can assure you there'll be something similar. So if you feel like you're losing anything by reducing the harm you do to cultures that have been suppressed in the past, then I would say that you just need to do more research, and you need to understand that there's a reason why people can find these things offensive when taken out of context. And so, yeah, my tip to you would be to avoid as much as you can and to educate yourself and listen to voices of people who are from different cultures, and yeah, listen to them and work from there. And no one is perfect, and it doesn't mean that every person from that culture is going to agree on a particular subject, but it just means you can have more of a perspective and review what you're doing and think, is this harmful or is this not, and how can I reduce my harm? So yeah, just consider that. And this is partly why creating your own practice is so key, and doing your research and going to the source of things is so helpful. So my next tip to you after speaking about that is going to be that just because people have been practicing for many years doesn't mean that they are any better of a witch than you, and it doesn't mean they have any more authority than you have inherently. And whilst with time comes experience, that's only if you're actually putting in the practice in that time. Someone could be a witch for 20 years, but they've only done actual active witchcraft for 5 or 10 of that, and that's that's fine. Everyone's got their own timescale, but I think oftentimes I see in the community people who still do, problematic practices because they've always done it that way, or people who try and lord it over newer witches, or witches in general, because they've been practicing for, I don't know, however many years they want to claim, however many generations they want to claim. It doesn't make you any less of a valid witch. It doesn't matter when you've come to witchcraft. It doesn't matter if you've come to it in your 30s, in your 40s, and however you've come to it. It doesn't matter if you're younger, older. It doesn't matter in terms of time, if you've been practicing, as long as you've been putting in the work, because really only you can kind of gauge how much progression you've made. And you can do that through talking to other witches and really writing down the things that you've learned so far and going, oh yeah, actually I do know more than I think perhaps, and that's not to say we should dismiss people who've been doing things for some time. It's just to be aware that the people who shout about how many years they've been doing witchcraft sometimes shout about that for a reason, and that reason can sometimes be a bit of an insecurity about being left behind, and with new movements and new tools in witchcraft, and I think that's a shame. I think witches really need to try and stay as fresh as they can and stay up to date with newer witches and work with them and encourage them, because witchcraft we want it to grow, we want it to still be a thing, and I think if we're trying to be a bit sort of gatekeepy, I don't think that's a good thing. So that would be my sort of tip, and my myth is that it doesn't really matter about how long you've been practicing, as long as you've been putting in the effort itself, and your spells and your magical sort of home and your surroundings and the things you do will be the real sort of teller of how effective your magic is. And onwards from there, I would say that my final thing to you is that you are an inherently magical person. You are a powerful witch, even if you don't feel it just yet, because oftentimes we can lack self-belief, and we can feel when we're first starting out, and throughout our craft, we have lulls and dips and things like that. We can feel like we're not good enough as witches. We feel like we're not doing enough magic. We feel like our magic isn't effective. We're getting the results that we want, or all those sort of things. But actually, there's going to be times when you have those fantastic aha moments where you're full of all these new ideas, and there's going to be moments where you are incredibly excited about the results of a spell that's worked because it didn't work the first time, but you've tweaked something about it, and now it's an explosion of brilliance that's come out of it. So just consider that maybe you just need a little bit more, another day, another time, just a little bit more to your practice. It's not just right now. Witchcraft is something that takes time, but takes practice. And I know I've said, it doesn't matter how long you've been practicing, but really, I think it's also worth giving yourself a certain amount of leeway and a certain amount of time to grow into the craft, and to know that just because right now you're not feeling it doesn't mean you're not going to be coming up with some amazing stuff in the future. So hopefully that gives you all of those give you some pointers and tips and things like that. I think, as I say, it's only advice, and you can take it or leave it, entirely up to you. And I'll put in, as I say, some links to some people that I think would be helpful. And with every video, we're going to have a magical and a practical thing to do, as well as the theory. So we've done magical theory, and now it's time to do the magical thing. Okay, witches, here's your magical thing to do. So we've talked about what I wanted to know when I first started out, but what about what we want to learn now, and structuring that learning into something? Well, I wanted to come up with 13 ideas, and if you're struggling for 13 ideas, have a think about what you do in the mundane world that perhaps you could incorporate into the magical one. So, for instance, if you like gardening, perhaps you want to learn about herb lore and about the magical properties of plants, that kind of thing. And if you're a more experienced witch, maybe you want to go in depth into a particular niche. So perhaps you want to learn about alchemy or something along those lines, and just list them out. It doesn't have to be in any particular order. And so far, it's just a list, isn't it? It's pretty mundane. But what we're going to do and how we're going to put the magic into this is by working with the new moon. And we're going to have our knowledge basically like the moon and its cycles. It's going to grow. So on the new moon, I want you to choose whatever subject it is you want and study that for the next 28 days or so until the full moon. And as the moon grows, so will our knowledge base and so will our foundation in whatever subject it is we particularly want to learn about. And that's a very sort of simple way of doing it. It's kind of sympathetic magic in a way. It's basically something that is like the thing is the thing. So knowledge and the moon both grow. And what I want you to do over these 28 days is, and I know it sounds like a long time, but it's actually not when you consider sort of all the other things we're going to do. I want you to really expand on it. So go beyond what the basics of it are. Like, if you say, for instance, you want to do energy work and centering and grounding and all that kind of stuff, that's very easy to do at home. But what about how would you center if you're on the move? How would you center on your commute? How would you do, for instance, ancestor veneration at a friend's house or a family house? Or how would you do a little bit of observing of land spirits or venerating land spirits if you're on holiday and not in your usual environment? How would you do protection magic if you were doing that at work? Consider all these different options. And the 28 days gives you time for life, because not everybody's got the same 24 hours. There's that phrase, isn't it? Oh, everyone's got the same 24 hours. Well, no, we haven't. Not if we've got a job to go to and commute to. Not if we've got family members to look after. Not if we have to do all our own driving and washing and all that kind of stuff. Not if we've got illnesses or things that take up our time, differing levels of concentration, different energy levels. It's okay to take rests. So these 28 days or so will really help us to fill up this knowledge without putting too much pressure on ourselves, and for accommodating for life itself and getting on with that. Because we've got other magical things we could be doing in the month as well. Perhaps we're doing spell work for a friend or ourselves. Maybe there's a particular celebration that's coming up. And so this really does give us that time. Now, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, you could look at what star sign or what zodiac sign the moon is in, the new moon that is, and say it's in Aries. Then that's a good time for new beginnings, for really kind of assertive and taking action kind of spells. So perhaps you want to do a spell for change, or learn about spells for changing jobs, changing circumstances, or whatever it is. Perhaps that's a good sign for really just going into positive workings and workings that are heading towards something. If it was Taurus, the star signs, so say the moon or the new moon was in Taurus, then that's a good time for things like prosperity, fertility, growth. When I say fertility, I'm talking of the mind, not just the body. And so really, this is a bit more of an advanced tip if you want to get into nitty-gritty. And how do you find out what star sign or what zodiac sign the new moon is in? Well, one of the easiest ways to do it is get an app on your phone. And, obviously you can look on websites too, but I've used an app called DAF Moon, that's DAFF. And that's been really good, actually, because it has, what's coming up in terms of the phases of the moon, what zodiac it's in, and it's just been helpful for me to plan out and plan ahead. So that's obviously a very good thing. And so, as I say, we've expanded on all our knowledge, we've taken the time, and what do we do then? We've got to the full moon, we've got all this knowledge now, what are we going to do with it? Well, what I'd really like you to do is summarise your month's study, or your 28 days or so study, in a paragraph, and then with that paragraph write it in something like a grimoire or a book of shadows, whatever it is. Doesn't really matter what it is. And I want you to write it in something that you don't mind messing up and you don't mind making mistakes in, because it's a real shame if you don't write down your stuff for fear of messing up a nice book. So get yourself a really kind of scrappy book that you don't mind putting your stuff in, and really summarise that month's work and that month's knowledge base in one paragraph. And that paragraph is not just for you, not just for your book, not just for your grimoire, but it's something you can then say to other people, people who are newer to the craft, people who are your friends in the craft or otherwise, because really knowledge is to be shared, and witchcraft is about not only us but also the community as a wider whole, and trying to benefit that in some way if we can. And I think really it's a great opportunity for us to help out and to progress each other, because I'm not a fan of withholding knowledge and that kind of thing. In that vein of talking about helping out each other and about planning stuff and being able to explain things, my friends at Secrets of the Cauldron, and this is not sponsored or anything like this, and I say friends because I've known one of them for years, this is their website, they've made a planner that is particularly good for witches like myself who don't really dig deities. They talk about them, but they don't enforce the fact that you have to believe in a deity to do magic. They've made a planner called Your Magical Guide to the Waxing Year. The reason I like it is because it will help you plan in this kind of learning of knowledge. So it's got the sort of mundane, days of the week sort of things, so you can really plan out all your bits and bobs. But it's also got at the back correspondences and such. Like, I'm going to do a proper review on this because it really deserves some attention, this planner. But this will really be quite a good way to help you out. And in this one, for instance, they do talk about the new moon, and they talk about, for instance, this one, they talk about the full moon, but they also talk about the new moon as well. They do talk about how to go about using the energies, and yeah, I think I really dig this as a planner. So if you can get yourself one of these, I definitely would recommend it, because this one, I know, as I say, this one is sort of one I would go to, because of the fact that it is so, anyone can find something in this, whether you're new or have been practicing a longer time. Like here, it's for instance, oh yeah, there we go, new moon in Taurus. So we've been talking about that, haven't we? And that gives you an idea of like when it is and when you could perhaps plan that knowledge. But yeah, as I say, do check them out. This planner is great. I can't vouch for any others because either there's been dodgy information in there, or there's been some kind of problematic practices that they've been perpetuating. But yeah, your Magical Guide to the Waxing Year avoids the sort of mandatory deity belief and all that stuff. So do check it out if you can. And while you're studying, another thing you can do is look at using some herb magic, and we can use something like peppermint, essential oil, or you can have a peppermint tea to really open up the airwaves and to help with oxygen flow. And yeah, it really does give me a bit of a sort of fresher feeling, and I feel like I can concentrate better with this. One of the ones of the herb kind of essential oils that has been recommended as well, and I would recommend it, is rosemary, which has been shown to be quite good for concentration. I think there's been some studies in that. So rosemary and peppermint are going to be your friends in terms of doing your sort of herb magic around your study. Other than that, just set yourself out time to do it. Grab any time you can, and as I say, get scrappy to start with and then summarise it at the end. So pick your 13 ideas, get to your new moon, study one of them for the 28 days or so, perhaps assigning it according to what the energies are that particular new moon. Really expand on it over those 28 days and allow yourself time. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. And at the end, once you hit that full moon, write out your paragraphs on what it is you're studying. So hopefully this gives you an idea. And I think this really helps prevent. I think a lot of people think that witchcraft is a phase for people who come into it, and you can go, yeah, it's a phase. It's 13 of them, and I've now got myself a real foundation in how to do the magical thing. So hopefully this helps. And in the meantime, health and wealth.